I didn't know the sentence that would shatter 9 years of my life would come from my own mouth. Not screamed, not thrown like a weapon, just spoken quietly, after I saw the way his hands were shaking. I need you to leave. My name is Anna. I'm 31 years old, and until last weekend, I believed I was living inside a marriage that was solid, earned, built slowly over time, reinforced by routines and shared history. The kind of relationship people assume is safe because it's lasted long enough to feel permanent. 9 years together, 5 years married, plans for children next year, penciled loosely into the future like something we had time to grow into. I remember standing in our living room, watching my husband, Ben, 33, calm, dependable, the man who once took unpaid leave to drive my father to medical appointments, avoid my eyes. His phone lay face down on the coffee table. The house felt too clean, too quiet, like it was holding its breath. I had come home from a weekend trip to my hometown, a normal trip, something I'd done dozens of times before, visiting my parents, meeting old friends, nothing reckless, nothing dramatic. Except this time, I didn't come home alone. I came home carrying a secret so heavy it bent my spine forward when I walked through the door. My hands felt numb. My mouth tasted metallic. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears, loud enough to drown out everything else. Ben asked if I was okay. I sat on the edge of the sofa instead of next to him. That should have been his first warning. I did something, I said. He waited. He always waited. That was who he was. Steady, patient, trusting. I slept with someone else. The words landed between us and stayed there. No excuses, no justifications. Just truth, stripped down to its ugliest shape. Ben stood up without saying a word. He grabbed his keys and walked out. The door closed softly behind him, and somehow that hurt more than if he'd slammed it. An hour later, when he came back, he didn't yell. He didn't cry. He went upstairs, pulled out suitcases, and started packing my clothes with the same precision he used to organize our hiking gear. By the time I realized what was happening, my marriage had already shifted into something unrecognizable. I thought the worst part would be the cheating. I was wrong. The worst part was what came after. The rules, the silence, the month that would decide whether my marriage lived or died. And the certainty in his voice when he told me, "This doesn't just go away." If you had met me 9 years ago, you would have seen a version of me that still believed love was something you could earn by being good enough. I was 22 then, fresh out of school, still tangled in my family's expectations, still trying to prove I could be responsible, respectable, the kind of woman people wouldn't whisper about. I met Ben through a mutual friend group, the kind that always gathered in the same places. Hikes on weekends, backyard barbecues, cheap pubs with sticky tables and loud laughter. Ben wasn't loud. He wasn't flashy. He was the person who noticed when someone's glass was empty and quietly refilled it. The one who remembered details, what kind of coffee I drank, how I hated cilantro, the way I always rubbed my thumb against my ring finger when I was anxious. On our third date, I made a joke about how I was bad at commitment. Ben didn't laugh. He just looked at me, steady and calm, and said, "I'm not interested in chasing someone who thinks running is part of love." It should have scared me. Instead, it felt like relief. We built a life the slow, ordinary way. Weeknight dinners, shared grocery lists, long walks where we talked about nothing and everything. We argued sometimes, but it was never screaming. It was always solved, always repaired. My parents liked him. That mattered more than I want to admit. And when my father got sick 2 years ago, it was Ben who showed up like a second spine in my body. He rearranged his work schedule. He drove my dad to appointments while I handled the family business. He never made me feel guilty for being consumed by it. One night, exhausted, I sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets and said, "I don't know how to do all of this." Ben crouched down beside me and took my hands in his. His thumbs were warm. "You don't have to do it alone," he said. "That's what I'm here for." That's the version of him I kept clinging to later, like if I remembered it hard enough, it could undo what I did. We got married after 4 years of dating. Nothing extravagant, comfortable, planned, responsible. We talked about children in that vague future tense couples use when they're not ready yet, but want to believe they will be. "We'll start trying next year," I told him once, half smiling like it was a promise. Ben kissed my forehead. "Next year," he echoed, like he trusted the timeline. We even talked about infidelity, once, maybe 3 years ago, after someone in our circle went through a separation. I remember it clearly because Ben's tone was so calm it made the words sharper. "If either of us cheats," he said, "we're done. I rolled my eyes at the time, like it was hypothetical and dramatic. Obviously, I said. Trust is everything. Ben held my gaze for a long second. I'm not saying it to scare you, he said. I'm saying it because I know myself. I know what I can't come back from. I should have listened harder. The truth is, by the time last weekend arrived, our life had become so stable that I stopped checking the foundation. We had routines, predictable arguments, predictable forgiveness. I didn't feel watched. I didn't feel interrogated. I felt trusted. And maybe that's the ugliest part, how much room he gave me to be safe. That Friday before I left for my hometown, we had the smallest, stupidest disagreement. The recycling bins hadn't been taken out. The kind of thing that shouldn't matter, but it did, because it made the air slightly colder. Ben stood in the doorway while I zipped my overnight bag. Can you just remember next time? He asked, tired but controlled. I huffed a little, defensive. I was busy, I said. It's not a crime. Ben didn't snap back. He just nodded once, like he was filing it away. Okay, he said. Drive safe. And I kissed him quickly, too quickly, because part of me was already halfway out the door. I told myself it was just a weekend. I told myself I'd come back and everything would still be intact. I didn't know I was walking toward the moment that would make Ben's earlier words feel like prophecy. If either of us cheats, he'd said, we're done. And I had smiled like it was impossible. Looking back now, I can see the cracks forming long before I fell through them. At the time, they didn't feel like warning signs. They felt like restlessness, like noise under the surface I didn't have a name for. The truth is, I had started feeling small. Not because Ben made me feel that way, he didn't, but because our life had become so neatly defined that there wasn't much space left to question who I was becoming. Everything was stable, predictable, safe. And safety, when you don't examine it, can start to feel like a cage. I didn't talk to Ben about it. That's the first mistake people make when they want to believe they're still good partners. They convince themselves silence is kindness. I told myself, this is normal. Long relationships settle. I told myself, everyone wonders sometimes. When I visited my hometown, it felt like stepping into an older version of myself, one that remembered who I was before responsibility calcified around me. The pub was the same. The jokes were the same. The faces hadn't changed much. It was comforting, familiar, disarming. On Saturday night, I met Chloe and Olivia at the old mill. We sat at a corner table, wood-scarred from years of spilled drinks and carved initials. We talked about nothing important. Gossip, old teachers, who'd moved away, who'd gotten divorced. I drank slowly. I remember counting it, almost defensively. 2 glasses of white wine, 1 gin and tonic over 4 hours. I wasn't drunk. I wasn't reckless. That's what made everything feel so insidious later, how normal it all seemed. When Tom, Chloe's younger brother, arrived around midnight to give us a ride, I barely registered him as anything more than a convenient solution. I'd known him forever. He was part of the background of my adolescence. Jokes, teasing, the occasional comment about how he'd always had a crush. It had never mattered. But that night, in the quiet of the car with the pub noise fading behind us, something shifted. Chloe and Olivia were dropped off first. Each goodbye shortened the car, tightened the space. When it was just Tom and me, the silence felt heavier, not uncomfortable, but charged in a way I didn't interrogate soon enough. I feel bad, I said, glancing at the navigation app on my phone. Your place is closer than my parents'. It's fine, he said easily. You can call an Uber from there. And that's how it started. Not with intention, not with a plan, but with a series of small decisions that felt reasonable in isolation. In his apartment, I sat on the edge of the bed, phone glowing in my hand as I refreshed the ride app again and again. No cars available. The clock ticked past 1:09 a.m. You can take the bed, Tom said, gesturing vaguely. I'll crash on the couch. I'll drive you in the morning. I shook my head immediately. No, that's okay. I'll keep trying. I remember how close he was sitting, how easy it would have been to stand up and create distance. I didn't. When he leaned in, it didn't feel dramatic. It felt inevitable, like something that had been hovering for years finally decided to land. And I didn't stop it. The moment after was worse than the moment itself. As soon as it was over, something inside me collapsed. The air felt wrong. The bed felt foreign. I sat there staring at my hands while Tom asked if I was okay. I shouldn't have done that, I said, my voice already breaking. I cried in his car afterward. I cried in my parents' driveway. I cried with my phone pressed to my ear at 4:03 a.m., listening to Ben's voicemail pick up because I didn't know what to say yet. By Sunday morning, the guilt had already hollowed me out. I knew with terrifying clarity that this wasn't a mistake I could fold into silence. And when I finally walked through my front door that evening, Ben took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. What I didn't understand yet was that the moment I spoke the truth, I would lose control of everything that came after. I can still feel the weight of that Sunday evening in my chest, like my lungs never fully expanded again after it. The house smelled clean, lemon cleaner and laundry detergent. Too clean. Like Ben had already been moving through the space, putting things in order, without knowing why he needed to. I closed the door behind me and stood there with my overnight bag still on my shoulder. Ben was in the living room, standing instead of sitting. His arms were crossed loosely, not defensive, just braced. He looked tired. His eyes searched my face the way they always did when he wanted to understand something without forcing it. "You okay?" he asked. I opened my mouth, closed it again. My throat felt tight, like I'd swallowed something sharp. My voice cracked immediately. I swallowed. "I need to tell you something." He nodded once and sat down in the armchair across from the sofa, giving me space instead of taking it. I sat on the very edge of the cushion, not beside him. That detail matters. I knew it even then. "I did something," I said. Silence stretched between us. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the ticking of the clock on the wall. My heart was beating too fast, like it was trying to escape. "I slept with someone else." The words didn't echo, they just fell. Ben didn't say anything. He stood up so abruptly the chair legs scraped against the floor. For a moment I thought he might shout. Instead, he walked past me, grabbed his keys from the hook by the door, and left. The door closed softly. That sound, that gentle click, cut deeper than any slammed door ever could have. I sank forward, elbows on my knees, hands covering my face. I didn't chase him. I didn't call. I sat there and waited for whatever I'd just set in motion to come back and finish me. When Ben returned about an hour later, I was still in the same spot. He didn't look at me at first. He walked upstairs. I heard drawers opening, closing, fabric shifting. My stomach dropped. I stood up slowly and followed him. In our bedroom, he had pulled 2 large suitcases out of the closet. He was methodically folding my clothes, dresses, jeans, sweaters, placing them inside with an efficiency that felt surgical. "What are you doing?" I asked, even though I already knew. He didn't stop. "Packing," he said. "For?" My voice sounded small. "For you." I took a step closer. "Ben, please." He finally looked up. His face wasn't angry. That scared me more. It was flat, controlled. "You said it yourself," he said. "You slept with someone else." "I know," I whispered. "I know. I'm so sorry. I didn't—" He held up a hand. "Don't explain it right now." I felt something snap inside me. I slid down until I was sitting on the floor in the hallway outside the bedroom, my knees pulled to my chest, my forehead resting against the doorframe. "I made a mistake," I said, the words tumbling out between sobs. "It didn't mean anything. I don't love him. I love you." Ben zipped one suitcase closed. "I believe that you're sorry," he said calmly. "That doesn't undo what happened." He carried the suitcases downstairs and set them near the front door. I followed him into the kitchen, where I sank onto the floor again, my back against the cabinets, my hands shaking uncontrollably. He took out his phone. "Who are you calling?" I asked. "Chloe," he said. "She lives nearby." "No, please," I said. "I don't want—" "She needs a place to stay," he said into the phone as it rang. "She'll explain." He ended the call before I could say another word. "I'm going out for a bit," he said, grabbing his jacket. "Her ride will be here soon." I reached out as he walked past me, my fingers catching the fabric of his pants near his ankle. "Ben," I said, my voice breaking completely. "Please don't do this." He gently, carefully removed my hand. "I need space," he said, "right now." And then he was gone again. When Chloe arrived, I barely remember standing up. I remember the way she avoided my eyes. I remember the weight of the suitcases as we loaded them into her car. By the time Ben came back, the house was empty of me. And somewhere between that first night of silence and the morning after, I realized this wasn't just about what I'd done. This was about what he would demand next. The first night away from the house felt unreal, like I was sleeping inside someone else's life. Chloe's guest room smelled like lavender detergent. The bed was too soft. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ben's hands folding my clothes with that quiet precision, like he was erasing me carefully, making sure nothing spilled or tore. I didn't sleep. My phone lay on the nightstand, screen dark. I didn't know if I wanted it to light up or stay silent. When it finally buzzed just after noon the next day, my heart lurched so hard it hurt. It was Ben. I answered immediately. I need details, he said, his voice steady but distant. Everything. Written. Email it to me. My throat tightened. Ben! If you leave anything out, he continued, there's no conversation after that. I'll send it, I said quietly. Good. A pause. I won't read it right away. The line went dead. I spent the rest of that day writing and deleting, my fingers hovering over the keyboard as if the right phrasing might somehow soften the truth. Every sentence felt like a fresh wound. I sent the email just before dinner. Then I waited. The waiting was worse than the packing. I didn't hear from him again that night, or the next morning, or the next afternoon. Instead, the silence stretched, clean and deliberate. By Tuesday, my phone was full of missed calls. Friends. My sister. My mother. No one knew the full story yet, but everyone knew something was wrong. On Wednesday, Megan, one of my friends, showed up at Ben's front door and confronted him. She told me later that she demanded to know what right he had to throw me out. When I heard that, shame burned through me like acid. He hadn't thrown me out. He had drawn a line. That night, Ben finally called. I've contacted lawyers, he said. No preamble. 3. I wanted information. My chest tightened. Are you filing? I'm preparing, he replied. Those aren't the same thing. I clung to that distinction like it was oxygen. I need to see you, I said, just once. There was a long pause. Thursday, he said finally. Late afternoon, at the house. Yes, I breathed. Thank you. And Anna? His voice hardened slightly. I'll be recording the conversation. I understand, I said. I meant it. When Thursday came, I arrived early. I stood outside the house I'd lived in for 5 years, staring at the front door like it belonged to someone else now. When Ben opened it, he looked composed, clean-shaven, controlled, like a man who'd turned grief into structure. I stepped toward him instinctively, my arms lifting for a hug. Don't, he said softly. I stopped. We sat in the living room, facing each other like strangers negotiating a contract. He told me he hadn't read my email. I want to hear it from you, he said, out loud. I told him everything. The pub, the drinks, Tom's apartment, the kiss, the choice. I didn't minimize it. I didn't excuse it. When I finished, I waited for anger. Instead, Ben exhaled slowly and said, the specifics don't change the outcome. My hands curled into fists. So that's it? He leaned forward slightly. I'm proceeding toward divorce, he said. But that word cracked something open. But I'm willing to do one thing first, he continued. A 1-month separation, no contact. My heart raced. A chance? A process, he corrected, with rules. He laid them out calmly. No contact, mutual fidelity, full STD screenings. And I had to tell our families and close friends the real reason for the separation. I nodded through tears. I'll do all of it. You don't get to decide the outcome, he said. You only get to decide if you follow through. I will, I said. I swear. When I left that day, the hope I felt was fragile, but real. What I didn't know yet was that the silence ahead wouldn't heal us. It would strip everything bare. The first thing Ben did after our meeting wasn't dramatic. It was practical. The locks were changed the very next morning. I found out when my key didn't turn. I stood on the front porch for a full minute, staring at the door like it might recognize me and open anyway. When reality finally settled in, it felt less like rejection and more like confirmation. This was real. This was happening. I didn't call him. I didn't knock. The rules were clear, and for once I followed them exactly. Instead, I went back to Chloe's place and sat on the edge of the bed, hands folded in my lap, like a child waiting for punishment. The month began like that, quiet, structured, suffocating. I scheduled my STD screening the same day. Sitting in that sterile clinic, answering questions out loud about my sexual history felt like my private failure had become public property. When the nurse asked, any recent exposure? My voice shook as I said, yes. I hated myself in that moment, not just for the act, but for the way it had rewritten my identity. Ben didn't contact me, not once. His silence wasn't cruel, it was disciplined. My lawyer contacted his. Formal language replaced emotion. Words like separation terms, no contact period, asset clarification started appearing in emails like, they'd always belonged in my life. My family found out next. Telling my parents was worse than telling Ben. My mother cried immediately. My father went quiet, his disappointment heavy and wordless. You cheated? My mother asked, like she needed to hear it again to believe it. Yes, I said, I did. She didn't ask why. She didn't defend me. She just said, Ben didn't deserve that. She was right. Friends reacted differently. Some were supportive. Some were careful. Some stopped calling altogether. Megan sent me a long message about how Ben was being cold and punitive. I didn't respond. I didn't have the energy to correct anyone's narrative anymore. The days blurred together. Work, gym, sleep, repeat. I followed the rules because following rules gave me something to hold on to. By the second week, the silence had started to feel intentional. Not just from Ben, but from the world. Like everyone had decided I needed to sit alone with what I'd done. One afternoon at the grocery store, I ran into Tom. He was in the produce aisle. Our eyes met for half a second. He turned and walked away so quickly he almost hit another cart. The shame flooded me instantly, hot and dizzying. I didn't follow him. I didn't want answers. I didn't want apologies. I wanted the past to stop moving. By the third week, I heard through friends that Ben had already started organizing paperwork. The divorce documents sat in a folder on his desk. That image haunted me more than anything else. Paper, ink, order. It was so him, and I was nowhere in it. The worst pressure came from my own mind. I replayed the night over and over, looking for a moment I could cut out and discard like a tumor. Every time I tried to soften the memory, it sharpened instead. The month didn't feel like a chance. It felt like a countdown. Near the end of the fourth week, Ben texted me for the first time. Saturday, 3 p.m., at the house. My heart jumped into my throat. I replied immediately, "I'll be there." I spent the next 2 days rehearsing conversations that never happened, apologies that didn't sound desperate, explanations that didn't sound defensive. When Saturday came, I arrived exactly on time. The house was clean, immaculate. It felt like a place staged for someone else. Ben poured coffee and sat across from me. "I've thought a lot," he said. I waited, barely breathing. "I don't think reconciliation is possible." The words landed quietly, but they knocked the air out of me. "I needed certainty," he continued. "I have it now." Something inside me cracked open, not in a dramatic way, but in the slow, collapsing way buildings do when their supports are removed. "So this is it," I whispered. "Yes." There was no yelling, no accusations, just an ending. I nodded because there was nothing left to negotiate. What I didn't realize yet was that this wasn't the lowest point. The darkest moment hadn't come yet. The darkest moment didn't arrive with noise. It arrived in the quiet after everything was decided. After Ben said the words. After I nodded like I understood. After I walked out of the house for the last time and closed the door behind me. I sat in my car in the driveway for almost 20 minutes, hands resting uselessly in my lap, staring at the steering wheel like it might tell me what to do next. Nothing felt real anymore. Not the neighborhood, not the trees lining the street, not even my own reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked older, hollowed out. I drove without destination until I ended up parked near a familiar walking trail. The same one Ben had gone to the night I confessed. I hadn't known that then. The irony didn't hit until later. I got out of the car and started walking. Each step felt like dragging something heavy behind me. Regret, shame, grief. All braided together so tightly I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. I kept thinking, this is my fault. Not in the vague, self-punishing way people say it to sound accountable, but in the concrete, undeniable way that leaves no room for bargaining. I didn't blame Ben. I didn't blame circumstances. I blamed myself. At some point, I sat down on a bench and finally cried the way I hadn't allowed myself to yet, ugly, gasping sobs that made my chest ache. My hands trembled so hard I had to press them flat against my thighs to steady myself. I thought about the life we'd built, the kitchen where we cooked together, the hikes, the quiet nights where his presence felt like an anchor, and I had detonated it. That realization settled in with crushing weight. By the time I made it back to Chloe's house, I felt numb. I crawled into bed fully dressed and stared at the ceiling, my thoughts looping in merciless circles. If I had left earlier, if I had spoken up, if I had stopped it, none of those thoughts mattered anymore. The finality of it all pressed down on me until breathing felt like work. That night, I dreamed I was standing in our old living room while everything was being packed away piece by piece. Not just furniture, but memories, laughter, trust, the future we'd planned. I woke up with my heart racing and my throat tight, like I was suffocating. For the first time since all of this started, I wondered something dangerous. Who am I without this marriage? The answer terrified me. Because without Ben, without the structure of our life together, I was left with myself, and the knowledge that I was capable of causing this much damage. I didn't trust myself anymore. The next few days passed in a blur. I moved through them on autopilot, answering messages mechanically, eating without tasting anything. People told me I would heal, that I would forgive myself, that time would soften the edges. None of it helped. The worst part wasn't losing Ben. It was realizing that no apology, no amount of remorse could undo what I'd done. Some mistakes don't come with redemption arcs. They come with consequences. And I had to sit inside mine. The turning point didn't feel triumphant. It felt still. It happened one ordinary afternoon when I was folding laundry at Chloe's kitchen table, sunlight spilling across the tiles like nothing in my life had imploded. I was matching socks that weren't mine, touching fabric that carried no memories, when a thought slipped in, uninvited but firm. This is not the rest of my life. At first, the thought felt almost offensive, like I was trying to escape accountability. But it didn't come with excuses. It came with clarity. I hadn't suddenly become a villain because I made one catastrophic choice, and Ben hadn't become cruel because he refused to stay. Two things could be true at the same time, and I had been so focused on punishing myself that I'd forgotten that. I thought back to the rules Ben had set. They weren't about control. They were about self-protection. And for the first time, I understood that my job now wasn't to convince him to change his mind. It was to accept the consequences without letting them erase me. That realization hurt, but it also steadied me. I stopped replaying the night at the pub on a loop. When the memory surfaced, I didn't try to rewrite it anymore. I let it exist, ugly and unresolved. I started therapy, not because I wanted Ben back, but because I didn't trust myself to understand my own choices yet. Sitting across from someone who didn't know me, who wasn't disappointed in me, felt strange at first. I'm afraid I'll do this again, I admitted during the first session, that I don't know how to sit with discomfort without blowing everything up. That sentence changed everything. Because it wasn't about infidelity. It was about avoidance. I realized how often I'd swallowed dissatisfaction instead of naming it, how I'd mistaken stability for stagnation, and silence for peace. None of that justified what I did. But it explained something important. I stopped trying to reach Ben through mutual friends. I stopped scanning my phone for signs he might reconsider. I let the ending be an ending. One evening, I sat alone in my car and finally opened the email Ben had sent weeks ago, the one confirming the divorce paperwork was moving forward. Instead of panic, I felt something quieter. Acceptance. I whispered out loud. Okay. Not because I was okay, but because I was ready to be. The next morning, I did something small but symbolic. I deleted the folder of photos on my phone from the early years of our marriage, the ones I kept revisiting, like proof that I'd ruined something perfect. I didn't delete them out of spite or denial. I deleted them because I didn't need to punish myself anymore to remember the lesson. The turning point wasn't about power over Ben. It was about reclaiming power over myself. I couldn't undo the damage, but I could decide what kind of woman I would be after it. One who hid from her mistakes, or one who learned from them without self-destruction. That choice didn't erase the loss, but it gave it meaning. The fallout didn't explode all at once. It spread quietly, through conversations I wasn't part of, through decisions made in offices I never stepped into, through a life that continued without me in it. The divorce moved forward the way paperwork always does, slow, procedural, indifferent to emotion. Ben didn't speak to me directly anymore. Everything went through lawyers. Emails replaced voices. Neutral language replaced history. The house was sold. I didn't go to see it one last time. I didn't need that kind of closure. When the paperwork finalized, I sat in my car outside the courthouse and stared at the stamped documents in my lap. The word dissolution felt heavier than any accusation. I signed where I was told to sign. Ben wasn't there when I left. I heard things through others, the way you do when your life overlaps with someone else's, just enough that it can't be fully separated. He kept the routines that had always anchored him: work, gym, weekends, scheduled to the minute. Friends said he seemed fine, which I knew meant controlled, not healed. I didn't take satisfaction in that. I didn't want him to suffer. I wanted him to be okay, even if that meant being okay without me. There were moments when guilt flared again, sharp and sudden. When I heard a song we used to hike to, when I passed the coffee shop where we'd spent Sunday mornings, when I remembered how easily he trusted me. But something had shifted. The guilt no longer swallowed me whole. It came and went like a wave instead of a flood. People reacted differently as time passed. Some friends drifted away, uncomfortable with the messiness of it all. Others stayed, careful but kind. My parents stopped asking about Ben and started asking about me, not in the panicked way they had at first, but with genuine curiosity. "What do you need right now?" my mother asked me one afternoon. The question stunned me. I didn't know yet, but for the first time, I believed I was allowed to figure it out. I moved into a small apartment on the other side of town. One bedroom, neutral walls, no shared memories embedded in the corners. I bought furniture slowly, intentionally. I learned how to sit with silence without filling it with regret. I didn't date, not out of fear, but out of respect. For myself, for the gravity of what I was recovering from. Therapy helped me see patterns I'd never named before. How I equated being needed with being loved. How I avoided conflict until it forced itself out sideways. Understanding didn't absolve me, but it anchored me. I stopped telling the story of my marriage like it was a tragedy with a villain and a victim. It was a story about two people who wanted different things at the wrong time, and one of them made a choice that couldn't be undone. And I owned my part in that. One afternoon, months later, I ran into Ben's friend at the grocery store. He hesitated before speaking to me, like he wasn't sure which version of me he was allowed to acknowledge. "Ben's doing okay," he said eventually. "He's steady." I nodded. "I'm glad." And I meant it. I walked out of the store feeling lighter, not because the past had changed, but because I had. The fallout didn't destroy me. It stripped me down. And in that stripping, I found something solid beneath the shame. I don't tell this story because I'm proud of how it started. I tell it because I'm proud of how it ends. Not with reconciliation, not with forgiveness wrapped in a bow, but with honesty, uncomfortable, unglamorous honesty. The truth is, I lost my marriage the moment I chose silence over vulnerability. The night I crossed a line, I didn't just betray Ben, I betrayed the version of myself that believed I could outrun dissatisfaction instead of naming it. And I paid for that. But loss doesn't have to be the same thing as destruction. Today my life is quieter, smaller, more deliberate. I wake up in a space that belongs only to me. I make decisions without wondering how they'll affect someone else's sense of stability. I speak up sooner. I sit with discomfort longer. I no longer confuse peace with avoidance. I still think about Ben sometimes, not with longing, but with respect. He showed me that boundaries aren't cruelty, they're clarity. He chose self-respect over familiarity, and that choice forced me to learn how to respect myself too. I don't expect everyone to understand my story. Some people will hear it and reduce it to a single word: cheater. Others will try to soften it into something more palatable. Neither version matters anymore. What matters is this: mistakes don't define you unless you refuse to learn from them. Accountability isn't about punishment, it's about growth. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is accept an ending without trying to rewrite it. I don't know what my future looks like yet, but I know this: I will never again confuse stability with happiness or silence with love. And if you're listening to this story while sitting inside your own quiet dissatisfaction, hear me clearly. Talk before it's too late. Choose honesty while you still have something to protect. And if you've already crossed a line you can't uncross, own it, learn from it, and rebuild without destroying yourself. This chapter is closed, not because it didn't matter, but because it taught me exactly who I need to be next.